everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Karina. I'm the Member Communication Specialist with Save the Sound. I'm just going to give the quickest intro to kind of get everybody oriented to the space and do some of the tech side of things. We are recording this webinar so that we can recirculate it later, so that you all can watch it later, or people who aren't able to join us can watch it. So for that reason, we ask you guys to stay on mute for the duration of both presentations. There will be plenty of time for questions and answer at the end. And for questions, if you would like to type them into the chat as the presentations go, please feel free to do so. I know sometimes you can think of a question and then it leaves too quickly. So don't hesitate to type in questions as we go. We'll just wait until the end to ask them all. So that's the tech side of things. And then I'm going to do a really quick intro. If anybody is new to Save the Sound leads environmental action in our region. We fight climate change, save endangered lands, and protect the Sound and its rivers. And we also work with nature to restore ecosystems. So I really want to make sure we have time for questions. That's all I'm going to say for now. I'll talk a little at the end as well. But I just want to introduce our two speakers. We have Soundkeeper Bill Lucey with us. We also have Sherill Baldwin from Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it off to Bill.
Can everybody see this?
Yeah, I think we're all good.
There it goes. Okay. I see a couple people in the waiting room.
Yep, letting them in now.
Okay, so as we mentioned, my name is Bill Lucey. I'm the Long Island Soundkeeper with Save the Sound. And we're here today to talk about how plastic gets into the waterway, and Sherill is going to talk about solving that problem at the root. We mentioned this is our mission statement that Karina mentioned. We do work in New York and Connecticut, so we encompass the entire watershed of Long Island Sound. So I'm going to dive right into this issue of trash, plastic. It's regional. A lot of it is regional. And I have a few slides down. I go into this in more detail, but the point I want to make here is that what goes down on our watershed, was thrown out a window or thrown on a sidewalk, ends up in Long Island Sound many times. And all these little spots are cleanup areas from groups that coordinate with us that use what's called the Clean Swell app, which collects a lot of data on what they're picking up. And that allows us to evaluate what's going on with policy and just behavior in general. But I always put this caveat in when I talk about plastic, is that it's not all regional. The oceans are connected. It can come from anywhere. I ran beach cleanups for 10 years on the outer coast of the Gulf of Alaska. And this picture to the right is a pile of tsunami debris from the Fukushima earthquake, which was an incredibly tragic event that removed entire towns. And so all the construction material, there's a lot of aquaculture there. These are lots of aquaculture buoys, and they all blew across in under a year. We had a Geiger counter. We checked for radiation. There wasn't a threat of that, but we cleaned up massive amounts of this stuff. And how we knew it wasn't from our area, one, we don't do aquaculture in our zone. And then two, we found a volleyball that was actually signed by a girls volleyball team, high school level, where they're at a tournament in Fukushima. And this, we tracked that down. It was translated by a public television station in NHK in Japan, which is their version of PBS. So they were able to return that ball to the owner, and they made a documentary out of it. It was very striking. But what we're dealing with here is a really big problem. Cheryl's going to deal with the root. I'm going to deal with the root of the problem. I'm going to deal with how it gets there. So microplastics is something that we're all hearing about. These are Bunker Manhattan behind me. They're filter feeders. So any little bit of plastic is going to be ingested by these fish or any filter feeder. The picture on the right, you can see the different types of microplastic. It just means small. There's different definitions. Smaller than 5 millimeters is one of them. This little bead here, micro bead, for manufacturing prep plastic or adding to products. This is a microfiber. You can see pieces of plastic bag here, chunks of plastic. It gets into everything. And by that, I mean, it gets into plants, it gets into your gardens, it can get into the roots, it can get into your bloodstream, it can get into the placenta of pregnant women. We are swimming in plastic bits all over the world right now. And it has real world effects. If you back away from the micro level, on a large scale, you can see this plastic fishing gear. This is a sperm whale. I used to be a marine mammal strander for many years in Alaska and did necropsies on many whales, sea lions, marine mammals. And this whale probably drowned when it grabbed a hold of a net and it was spun around. This isn't my photo, but a lot of times in necropsies, especially near urban areas, you'll find plastic in the stomach of whales. A number of them have died from it. This is about 30, 40 bags that were pulled out of a whale, I believe in the Gulf of Mexico. And what happens is that plastic can compact and block the digestive tract, and that's what causes the whale to pass away. So we have a role, we have a responsibility to do what we can to minimize this. We don't want the small stuff getting into the food chain. One of the biggest places where it comes from, especially the microfibers, is our laundry machines. And what happens is when the clothes go around, they break down and the fibers go down, shot out either into a sewer system or into your septic tank, which is then pumped and brought to a sewage treatment plant for further treatment. And there's no way they can filter these particles at the plant that goes out into either the river or into the ocean where it's discharged. I've installed this inline filter. That's the most effective. And that removes a large portion of it before it gets into the waste stream. Another thing that Save the Sound excels at, we have a fantastic department with engineers and designers, and we install rain gardens and bioswales. We've done a lot in New Haven. We've got a big project we're going to hopefully get funded in Bridgeport, working with local school kids to design them. But how they work is, here's a curb. Typically the storm water would run down carrying bottles and cigarette butts and shoot down a storm drain into a river and out to the sea. This is a curb cut. The trash comes in, it's all collected here. All the pollution, nutrient type pollution, is processed by these living plants. And then people can come by and collect the trash here before it gets into our waterway. If it does get into the waterway, you can install one of these interceptors. This is an Australian design called Bandalong. And it grabs all the trash that's floating down, and you can come along and pick it out of the bin. This is a picture of Bruce Brook between Stratford and Bridgeport, and you can see all the branches in there catching the enormous amount of debris that's flowing down the river. So we're working with Representative Gresco, who's a state rep from Stratford, to potentially clean all this out and then maybe install one of these floating traps. Would be the first in Connecticut. There is a boom on the Bronx River that serves this purpose. And if it gets out of the river onto out into the Sound, it ends up on our beaches. So Save the Sound is the coordinator for the beach cleanups in Connecticut. We also do some cleanups in New York, and we partner with the Ocean Conservancy, and they've been doing this for 30 years, and they collect specific data on what you find. And we did the same thing in Alaska. You want to see the different trends. If we had different types of fishing net in Alaska, we would save samples, and you could tell which country had discarded what net by the manufacturer, including high seas drift nets. So there's a lot of data you can get from all this volunteer effort. And to compare how it's been going the last couple of years, 2019 was obviously pre-pandemic. We had 73 events and over 2,500 volunteers. Last year, we did a virtual cleanup, and we had less of them. We had less volunteers, but it was a longer period of time. And if you look at this, we collected almost 4 tons of trash with 1,500 people. So that gives you an idea of how much is out there. And as I mentioned, we look at what the composition of that beach cast marine debris is. These plastic pieces are the marine debris, are the stuff that'll turn into microplastics. It's in the process of being broken down by the sun and the water. Cigarette butts are everywhere. People, you see it all the time when you're driving. People flick a cigarette butt out the window, down it goes a storm drain, out, it ends up on the beaches. And these things are highly toxic. And then food wrappers, that's something Sherill will hopefully address with her recycling talk. Um, Making it so we don't see those anymore someday in the near future, hopefully. And then we have a couple of interesting ones. Balloons, there's some legislation dealing with balloon releases in Connecticut potentially this session. And these will end up going out. I find them all the time when I'm out on the boat. I have a special net for netting balloons. And what happens with balloons is they get algae growing on them. And if they deflate a little bit, sea turtles especially, they see the algae, it gives them, so I've heard, a little more, makes them a little more appetizing, and they will consume these. And like the whales, that balloon can get impacted in their stomach. And of course, with the COVID-19, there's lots more gloves and masks, which we really didn't see before, that showed up last year. And then finally, strapping bans. Hopefully most of those are cut. I'm assuming everyone's ordering from Amazon now, so there's lots of packages coming. If you do have a strapping band, please cut them, because if it gets away, it can end up in the ocean. I've seen plenty of pictures of sea lions and seals that have a strapping band or a six-pack holder around their neck, and they grow into it. They swim into it as a smaller, like a juvenile or a young one, a pup, and then they grow into it and it constricts them. And I believe this is my last slide. Plastic bags, we did pass a tax and a ban on these in the session before last. And so we saw a great decrease in plastic bags on the beach. But with COVID-19, a lot of that stuff was relaxed because everybody was trying to be as careful as possible. Same with these containers. People wanted prepackaged food. They didn't want to get the virus. You know, getting an open sandwich on a napkin or something was, you know, people were being cautious. So that could be why we saw this increase. And then I'm going to save this slide to the very end. There are a number of bills that are in the Connecticut legislature right now that address some of these problems. But I'm going to hand it over to Sherill Baldwin now, because she's been working in this field for a very long time. And she has the content and some really interesting insight on how we may be able to solve these problems. So I'm going to stop sharing. And there you go, Sherill.
All right. Thanks, Bill. So hopefully I'll be able to do everything you've asked me to do, Bill. I hope I'm covering all that. First, I just want to say thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to everybody else who's taking out time for their lunch. And hopefully I don't see too many people eating because it will make me hungry. I just want to say plastics is a huge category. Plastics is huge. And so while Bill has sort of honed in on areas as it relates to marine debris and issues, of course, related to waterways and wildlife in those waterways, recycling and looking at recycling related to plastics is very different. So I'm going to touch upon a number of different themes that I hope people will find interesting. And I apologize if they're disjointed. I just want to touch upon them very quickly and then provide enough time for questions and answers. So I'm just going to dive right in terms of what is recycling so that we're all on the same page. A lot of people, if you look up in the right-hand corner here, you'll see a man moving a cart to a truck. This is where we participate. We put all of our bottles and cans, our newspaper, etc., in our blue bin or our blue cart, or perhaps we bring them down to a transfer station, and all those materials are collected. And we say, yay, we've recycled. And while we are a very important part of the system, it is just the first step. Then those materials have to go to a materials recovery facility, or what we might call a MRF. And there the materials are sorted and processed. They're sorted in terms of different grades of paper. Cardboard is often separated from mixed paper. And then we also have aluminum is separated from steel. We have different grades of plastic that might be separated from other plastics, etc. And they're all to meet what is called a specification. These materials are baled up. And a bale is a big square, if you will. Often they're 3 feet by 3 feet or 4 feet. Maybe they're 2 by 2 by 3, different sizes wrapped in wire. And they're different sizes because every company that buys material has a different specification. They have different instructions and guidelines for how to prepare materials to be able to sold to market. And in this case, we have a lot of bales of, it looks like plastic to me. And then what happens is it's quote unquote sold to an end market. In this case, the end market is making plastic pellets. Those plastic pellets are then sold again to have a bottle manufacturer that then makes bottles, which is then brought to a company that manufactures milk, and that material is bottled up in that container. And then we buy that container, and that is the recycling loop. And that's what it means to recycle and to have a closed circle. A lot of people ask, are we doing recycling wrong? Are we not doing it right? And of course, things that escape become litter, which is a big issue, which it sounds like everybody here is very concerned about. But from the recycling perspective, we look at it from a much broader understanding of things that could be collected or not collected to be put back into the economy. And this very busy slide is not fully to be able to understand, but it's really to say the USDA and the Economic Research Services, they study a trend of how many new books we have on our retail shelves every year. And if we look at the top here, well, they're reporting there's a decline in new products on our shelves. As consumers and as people who are trying to manage waste, there are over 20,000 new products every year. 20,000 new products. Do you think that those companies are contacting me about how they're packaging that material? Do you think those companies are having conversations with MRF operators and end markets about how that material is packaged and whether or not it can be recovered in any type of a recycling system? The answer is no. Nobody's really having those conversations. And so this shows a disconnect between systems. And so when people say, can I recycle blank, blank, blank? I often have to say, you got to show me a picture. I have no idea what you're talking about. And why don't I have any idea? Because there's 20,000 new products on our retail shelves every year. And as a result, we constantly have to be reacting to new products. In 2015, the department did a study looking at how much trash or how many recyclables are still in our trash. But at the same time, we wanted to try to understand what is going into our recycling stream. And we found these high-level contaminants that should not go in the bin. Contaminants or contamination are things that will ultimately be pulled out and put in the trash. And the more contaminants that go into our recycling system, the more it costs our communities to pay for recycling services because it takes so much more time to process that material. This also gives you an indicator of things that that MRF operators do not want in their facilities. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the triangle, and there's a number in the center. Especially if you guys are all interested in plastic, you probably know that symbol very well. And that symbol is not a guide to help you figure out what is recyclable or what is not recyclable. So I'm going to say that again because a lot of people get very sad when I tell this news. It's an ASTM code. It's a resin code to help industry understand what type of plastic resin that particular container is. It is not meant as a guide for us as consumers to figure out if that container is acceptable in a program or not. And I encourage you to look at this label instead. They have these labels for paper, plastic, and metal, and it identifies the container. It tells you what you need to do. In this case, it's rinse and insert a lid for a metal can. And there are tons of different designs, and this is a voluntary program that manufacturers and packagers could use. And we strongly encourage that they use this because it helps us not only as consumers, but people who do recycling education to help everybody understand what is acceptable in the program. If you are not aware, recycling is mandatory in Connecticut, and it has been since 1989 with new materials added in 2012. These are all the materials that are mandated for recycling. I hope this isn't a surprise to all of you. If you are members of and follow Save the Sound, I hope that it means that you are aware of this. And if we look at the list above the orange line, these are the materials that are acceptable in our mixed recycling program or our single stream program. And if you have any questions and say, well, that's different for my town, we have one universal list for the entire state of Connecticut that all municipalities follow. And that list was created back in 2017, and slowly municipalities have embraced it and moved towards it, and now everybody's on board. We have recyclect.com has a search tool as well as other resources for not only municipalities, but nonprofits, haulers, and facility operators. It's a search tool to help you understand if something's acceptable in the program, and if not, what you should do with it. I can tell you that we're in the process of creating an app. So soon this will be an app form, which is very exciting. There's a lot of things that are out. No loose bottle caps, no plastic bags, no polystyrene. And I can tell you these top three are really what you're finding out as litter. And so while they're not acceptable in the program, they should of course be going in the trash can. And litter is its own issue with its own behavior changes that are probably similar to recycling, but a little bit different. Pretty much the recycling program is all about containers. It's about containers, containers, containers. When it comes to plastic, it's about containers. And we ask you to leave the bottle caps on. There are lots of other recyclables, but they're not acceptable in the blue bin. And so I encourage you to think about not if it's recyclable, but is it acceptable in this particular program? And some things should just be put in the trash. As much as we wish they could be recycled, they should just go in the trash. And again, you'll see that a lot of things that we encourage go in the trash do become part of the challenges related to litter and marine debris. Other things to keep out, because we have people hand sorting these materials on the line before they are dealt with optical sorters and blowers and magnets. And we just need to keep our recycling workers safe. And some things like diapers and tampon applicators are just gross. So why does quality matter? Quality matters because when we put all of our materials in the container, the cleaner or the less contamination that goes in at the beginning makes it easier to sort, makes them easier to sell the products that can be then made into new products. And I thought you'd be interested. I know this is a little off topic because it's not about plastic, but it sort of is. This is glass at a MRF. This is glass at a Connecticut MRF from 2015. And look at all those things that are in there. Prescription bottles, toothbrushes, tampon applicators, lip balm, pens, batteries, bottle caps, toothpaste, razor. Most of them are plastic, and most of them are not what we want because we need containers, not all the little things you wish could be recycled. And again, these small things are most likely what Bill and any volunteers who were part of the cleanups will find on our beaches. A lot of people ask me, it even be recycled? Isn't it just being thrown away? Doesn't it just go to the incinerator? And the Recycle-CT Foundation did a study looking at the economics related to specifically the residential recycling programs, which included not only the curbside programs, the program at transfer station, the bottle bill program, as well as 3 of the residential product stewardship programs, mattresses, electronics, and paint. And what they found is over 4,900 jobs are working in these areas, and the amount of income and value added and total output in terms of the state of Connecticut. And again, If they're looking at haulers and they're looking at collection and services, it's just the recycling side of it. It is not the trash side of it. And so it just shows us that recycling is an integral part of our economy. And this is only a portion of the materials management system. This is not including businesses that work in composting or organics, or people that work on reuse and waste reduction. So is it really recycled? I'm part of a regional recycling marketing group. We are constantly tracking where are there new facilities. From the recycling perspective, I can tell you paper is a bigger issue. Plastics is such a small component of the recycling stream, if you will. However, I wanted to let you know that we have a lot of facilities that have come online in the last couple of years. We have a lot more facilities that are coming online, and these are all facilities that accept recyclables from our residential programs and that they make new products. So everybody says, yeah, but what is recycled? And that's a good question, and I think that's where you might be very interested. So again, if you are familiar with those resin codes, you're familiar with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I didn't put numbers intentionally because it's really not about the numbers per se. It's really understanding the type of resin and where are their markets. And if you recall that we have mandatory recycling for high density polyethylene as well as polyethylene or PET, both of those materials are in the recycling program. Why? Because they're good markets and they've always been good markets, and they're materials that can be easily recovered and made into new products. While low density polyethylene and polystyrene are out, plastic film is recyclable and the markets are pretty strong right now. And that is material that is plastic bags and other film that might go back to the retail store in terms of grocers and other retailers that accept plastic film. But polystyrene, it may be recyclable, but there's really no markets for it. It's very expensive to collect and then transport, and the return on investment is just really hard. And then, of course, you have a lot of issues with contamination and food on it that is very difficult for cleaning. And so you just don't have anybody that's interested in having it. It's one of the reasons why a lot of the large manufacturers are looking to phase out and using this type of packaging for their products, which is a good thing. They should be moving to products that are materials that we can put back into the recycling economy. Polypropylene is where that is mostly yogurt containers and deli containers. Again, those containers that are made out of polypropylene are accepted, and that there are pretty strong markets right now for polypropylene containers. Something that's out is polyvinyl chloride. You don't really find food products made out of this. We might call this bulky rigid plastics, which are acceptable probably at a transfer station for recycling, but they're not part of the mixed recycling stream because they're big items that are cumbersome and are not really meant to be dealt with and managed at a MRF. So I also wanted to touch upon something that I am not an expert in. So I'm just going to let you know now that this is a fairly new diagram for me. I've seen it presented a couple of times at conferences, and I'm not alone in learning something new every day. And that is different aspects of the world of plastics. Now, those of us that have been around a long time and are environmental advocates or recycling enthusiasts understand that biodegradable plastics have been around for a long time, and the science has changed. And because of that, some challenges have also come up. And these are areas that we need to focus on more in terms of terms that we use and definitions to help us understand what is this product made out of. So what you can see is there are 4 quadrants. And on the left half, both up and down, are things that are not degradable. These things do not degrade. On the right-hand side are things that do degrade. They break down into smaller pieces. On the top half, these are items that are made from plants, and the bottom half are things that are made from fossil fuels or petroleum and gas. And so when we look across the non-biodegradable and bio-based, these are plastics that are made from plants, but they do not break down. On the right side, these are plant-based plastics, and they do break down. On the bottom, we have biodegradable plastics that are fossil fuel-based. Very confusing. I saw probably a 45-minute presentation just outside. And so if it confuses you, you're not alone. So I decided to give you my notes. And these are my notes from when I saw this presentation. Again, if we start on the left-hand side, these are bio-based or plant-based materials. They're not compostable, but they are compatible with recycling programs. I'm gonna let that sink in. We could be making plastic out of plants and also recycling those containers. And we can recycle them, if we look at the bottom on the left, that these plastics are made from petroleum-based, but they can also be part of the traditional plastic recycling program. On the right side, if we go to the top, these plastics are degradable and they're also compostable, but they're not compatible with recycling programs. And because they're chemically made from plants, what we are being told is that they likely do not contribute microplastics to the world. However, if we continue on to the bottom, these plastics are not compostable. They're biodegradable, but they're not certified compostable. And I've been told that they have degradable additives added to conventional plastics that are fossil fuel based, and that this is where our microplastics come from. Now, if we look at conventional plastics, we know that microplastics come from these too, if they're not part of the recycling system, and if they become litter, because we know that they also break down into small bits and pieces. But I just wanted you to understand that it's much more complex than just good or bad. It's sort of like our system is like, well, it's becoming quite gray, and we are using terms interchangeably: degradable, bio-based, plant-based. It's very complicated. And I can tell you it's complicating the recycling industry as well, which is why we have these long conversations about, should we be supporting plant-based recyclable plastic? Should we be not supporting certain types of plastics anymore in terms of the recycling system, et cetera? Resources for you to read. Biodegradable Products Institute. I'll be sharing these with Karina so that everybody can get a link. The first is BPI World, or Biodegradable Products Institute. If you are looking at trying to get rid of plastics and move towards compostable serviceware, for instance, you would probably want to check BPI World, because they will tell you what type of fiber-based products or paper-based materials are PFAS-free. And then they're also a third-party certifier for compostable serviceware that is in fact plastic and biodegradable. So it's the material that's not recyclable, but it's compostable. And then Stina is a company called, used to be called More Recycling. And I just thought folks would be interested because they do a lot of research around plastics. Sometimes it is supported and paid for by industry, and sometimes it is not. And so if you are a data wonk and you want to do a deep dive, that's a good page for you. So I'm just going to end with a couple of slides. Hopefully I have a few more minutes. Too much focus on recycling. We talked a lot about recycling, but we need to remember that it's also about waste reduction. We need to prevent waste to begin with. We need to think about reuse opportunities. There are programs that talk about the systems approach, such as treating trash utility, which provides an incentive for people actually to think more about waste prevention, waste reduction, and reuse, and think about what they're purchasing to try to reduce the amount of trash that they generate. It's also a much more equitable program. So if you're looking at different ways to focus on reducing waste in the state of Connecticut, think about unit-based pricing or pay-as-you-throw and treating trash like a utility. This is really where the future needs to go. I also encourage you to think about personal changes. Because of COVID, we have a huge amount of takeout materials, and there are ways in which we can support our businesses and also perhaps look at local municipal ordinances to try to decrease the amount of stuff that we get, which also may become litter, which may also enter our waterways. I also encourage you to learn more about product stewardship. Product stewardship, of course, has a voluntary approach, which includes the plastic film recycling program that takes our plastic bags at supermarkets. And then some are mandated by law. That includes mattresses, paint, electronics, and thermostats. I hope you're participating in these programs now. Most municipalities are. And then in the future, we are looking at a number of different other categories, including packaging, which would make the manufacturers who make the packaging that we are burdened with to take responsibility at the end of life of those products. And so we could pose a number of different issues within the concept or the model of EPR or product stewardship that is mandatory or mandated by law. And it would ensure that those materials are recovered responsibly and perhaps even trying to prevent certain products from being created to begin with if they are just all about single use. If nothing else, I ask that you think about acceptable versus recyclable every time you put something in your recycling bin. And I say thank you very much for listening to me. And I apologize again for being sort of all over the place and throwing a lot of different ideas at you, but hopefully we'll have a lot of interesting discussions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bill and Sherill. We had a lot of great questions come through, a lot of good conversation in the chat as well. But I'm going to try to jump into the questions because we have a lot of them and I want to try to answer as many as possible. Somebody did ask about the legislative end of it. Bill, I don't know if you want to reshare that slide now or if you want to do that later. Bill was in the chat answering questions.
Let's go into the, because that could eat up the entire question time. So let's go into some direct questions that I know Sherill has some good answers for.
Yep. So the first question that came through was from Allison, and I think Bill addressed it in the chat, but Sherill, if you have a take on it as well. She wants to know what your take on TerraCycling is.
So TerraCycle has changed over time. I don't know a lot about their current model, but they are working with manufacturers to develop new items from strange products. I don't know if it's a real systems approach. While collection programs for specific things like crayons and cigarette butts can be exciting for us because we are diverting that material. If you have to deal with all the waste in the system, that is sort of like small potatoes. And so I don't know how much of an impact that they have, and also think about that you have to mail everything to them. It's really an efficient system approach. I think they're very innovative in trying new technologies, and that can be helpful. And I think that's all I can share because I probably don't know enough about their programs.
Okay, the next one, I'm just gonna kind of go through these. The next one was from Davida. They want to know, here at Seabury and Bloomfield, we're very concerned about our recycling. Currently, any plastic with a number on it is going in the blue bin for recycling. They want to know, should we advise people to put all the rest in the trash? They see that as a way to convince people to reduce their plastic consumption, but are interested in your advice.
Oh, excellent question. So I encourage you to go to recycleCT.com. In addition to the search engine or the search tool, there's also things you can download, and they're available to anybody. So flyers, posters, bill inserts, etc. And you yourself can put the widget on your webpage if your company wanted to, and for your employees as well as your clients. In terms of what is in and versus what are out, again, do not follow the recycling arrow with the number on it. A toothbrush may have a number 5 on it. I really don't care. A toothbrush is not a container. It needs to be a bottle, a jug, a jar, a tub, or like a deli container or a berry container. Anything beyond that should go in the trash. I know you don't like that answer, but that is the answer.
All right. The next question was, what happens to bottle lids, toothpaste tops, etc., that get thrown in the trash? Are they burned or buried in a landfill?
So all of our municipal solid waste goes to incinerators in Connecticut, and so it is burned. If it is at a facility and it's picked out, by the way, back in 2015, 14 to 19% of what was coming into a facility was quote unquote contamination, and it was put in the trash. I'm hoping that because this program has started since then, that we are seeing less contamination going in, but I think COVID caused some complications there. But all that contamination will also be sent to an incinerator to be burned.
All right. Can we expect a shift away from single stream, given all of the issues you've described with the mismatch between consumer understanding and what the recyclers will accept? Would we go back to sorting into more categories?
So the beauty is any municipality has control over their system. And any municipality can do whatever they want. However, they do get pressure from facilities because facilities sort single stream. So there's probably not a lot of benefits at this point to do separate, unless a town wants to market the materials directly. And in other parts of the country, that's what municipalities do. We do not do that in Connecticut. Most municipalities contract with a hauler, and the hauler brings it to the facility of their choice. In most cases, the hauler is also a facility operator, and so they bring it to their own facility. So we could go back to a dual or unmixed system, but I don't know if it will happen anytime soon. However, if we were going to have a product stewardship approach or an EPR program, we wouldn't have to worry about it, right? The manufacturers would have to come up with a program that works for them to expand collection of what we generate, as well as ensuring that there's a quality material that is recycled. A lot of states will count what is collected. Connecticut counts what is actually sold. And so we don't count that 14 to 19% that went to an incinerator, whereas some states actually just count what is ever collected. And so if we were going to institute an EPR program, we'd be looking at that number as well, and encouraging and requiring for manufacturers to meet certain goals. And so they would have to come up with a system which might make them change some of their manufacturing and packaging processes.
All right, and then Allie would also love to hear what changes have occurred or will be occurring since China is no longer accepting US recyclables. And then this one's almost a two-part. She also said, what is concretely happening in the US/Connecticut with shifting the onus from households to producer responsibility?
I'll take the first one. So in terms of markets, we've always had a wide variety of domestic and international markets for all the different materials that we collect in the residential recycling program. And while China soared hit the news and that hit your ears, you know, for us, it was the green fence back in 2015. And, you know, it's like things were moving in that direction for a long time and we were preparing for it. We as in terms of the industry. And so the slide I showed about our plastics recycled with all the different names of facilities, those are all domestic facilities that came about as a result of the green fence and then the national Chinese sword policy, because they knew that we needed to ensure that there were markets for the materials. And while plastics is sort of a mixed game, we have a lot of facilities that have come on board for paper. And again, if you were going to take a pie chart, 50% of our recyclables are paper and a very small percentage are plastics. And so I know today is a concern about plastic from a recycling standpoint. Paper markets are much more of a priority and an importance. And with fluctuating markets for plastics, it's unclear where they're going. And I guess I'll leave it at that. In terms of product stewardship, your municipality should join the Connecticut Product Stewardship Council and get involved with legislative actions. And Bill, I don't know if you know anything about the bills related to EPR.
Well, the one I was involved with was looking at tire manufacturers, and that was a rather heated debate in the Environment Committee because tires do have some toxic components. So it's what do we do with these things? From a fisheries standpoint, there was a new additive to tires that makes them pliable so they last longer, called 6-ppd dioxane, and it's very toxic to fish when they come from salt water into fresh water, and they go through what's called osmoregulation, so they can breathe in both fresh and salt water. So that one, I don't know where that bill is going. We do need to do something with the tire waste, and that extended producer responsibility is definitely going to be a key component to that. But that one is not passed yet. And I don't know if you're following any of the other stuff, Sherill.
I'm not. I wish I had time. I just don't have time. The department, though, supports packaging EPR, so I don't know where it's at, but we're probably going to be continuing to educate people about the issues to ensure that we get a program that is going to work for everybody.
Yeah, and we used to have it. When I was in the Peace Corps in Guatemala, they still had the system where you would get a soda bottle and they'd keep the bottle. You had to pay a big deposit on it, and you could see the roller marks on the bottle. And that's how Coca-Cola set it up back in the earlier part of the 20th century. Is they had a hub where the bottling plant was, and it would all go out, and then you bring all the bottles back and they'd fill them up again. So we've done it in the past, but it's a lot cheaper to just throw it away because of shipping.
Sadly.
All right, gonna go through as many questions as I can in the next 10 minutes. So Fred wants to know, does single stream recycling reduce the amount of plastic that can be recycled due to contamination from broken glass?
No. What reduces the amount of plastic it has to do with what is acceptable, what has markets, and what has the ability to be made into new products. So, if you put chapstick in there, I don't care if you wish it could be recycled because it's plastic. It's not going to be made into anything. It's going to go to the incinerator, and you're costing your town money by throwing it in the recycling bin.
So almost in the same vein, how clean must recyclable items be? Should they just be rinsed? And then what about things like peanut butter jars? Should that be run through the dishwasher, or what about that?
Yeah, I get that question every time. Rinsed is great. And yes, if you have a rubber spatula, use that to take out the peanut butter. And if you have animal pet food cans or tuna fish, yeah, you might want to use a little soap for those. But otherwise, rinsing is just fine.
Right. And then do you have a counterpart in New York, which is probably more of just, do you know of any resources for some of our supporters in New York to find more information?
New York has a DEQ. I'm not sure. I don't know if they're talking about the city or the state.
Yeah, so who asked that question, if you want to put that clarifier in the chat, and I can try to find at least some links you can look at in the follow-up email. Sherill wants to know if the slides or the recording will be available later. I can answer that really quick. Yes, the recording will be in the follow-up email. It will also be online, so keep an eye out for that. All right, so the next question is, Eggland's Best claims to sell high-quality eggs, but they come in styrofoam containers. Can we pass a law that bans the sale of eggs in anything but a cardboard container?
Sure. The other thing you could do is, if this is your favorite brand, tell them you love their product, but you hate their packaging. I'm a big Teddy peanut butter fan, and I love them because they're in glass. And if they were going to convert to plastic, boy, would I be writing to cut off my Teddy peanut butter.
There's actually a it's HB 6502, and it's a collection of actions that are proposed that include a polystyrene ban for Connecticut. But I did not hear the question of egg cartons come up, which is a good one. This is Senator Cohen's primary bill. She's the one who introduced it. And as a business owner herself, she doesn't use polystyrene for the food that she sells at her store. So that there is going to be potentially a polystyrene ban coming up if that's passed. But these are always the things when laws get passed, is the unforeseen consequences. Is there a loophole? Is there something that needs to be amended in the future to deal with the styrofoam egg cartons, for example?
Right. One of our next questions was, is shredded office paper compostable? And if it's not, what should we do with it?
I would say paper, of course, can break down in your compost bin, but I would not put unbleached paper, especially unbleached office paper, in my personal compost bin because of potential dioxin contaminants. I might use unbleached towels if I know that they don't have any chemicals on them. But yeah. In terms of shredded paper, because they're not acceptable in the mixed recycling program or the single stream program, many municipalities are offering shredded events that not only shred your materials, but will also accept pre-shredded. And so you should reach out to your recycling coordinator to ask if there's an upcoming event in your town.
And then there were a couple different questions about the too small to be recycled concept. One specifically said, if a plastic container is 2 inches wide but 5 inches tall, is it excluded because it could slip through? And then the other one was just a general rule of thumb.
So I don't have any of my samples. I usually have 3 bags of samples beside me, but this was a different kind of a presentation. So you may have a hard time to find, but this little green square is a 2 by 2 inch square. And I think this is what they're talking about, in the sense that if anything can go through that grid, maybe I should start again. So the MRF, everything travels through from the beginning to the end, and the very end is glass. So the photograph I showed you that has the lip on and the pens, etc., all of that is in there because the ending is that 2 by 2 inch grid. And so that if it can fall through a 2 by 2 inch grid, then it's going to contaminate the glass. And that is a huge issue because it's just really hard to, then you have to do a secondary sort for glass, which of course takes a lot of money. And so that's why prescription bottles are not in the program. It's why nip bottles are not in the program, and why other small things are not in the program. I hope that answers the question.
This next question feels pretty quick. It's just, can envelopes with a see-through window be recycled?
Yes, they're accepted program.
Okay, and then can plastic be recycled indefinitely, or does the quality degrade with each cycle?
That's a great question. I think the technology is improving. It used to be sort of one cycle and then it was made into a bench and that was it. And now, of course, we are seeing that there's more bottle-to-bottle plastics going on, depending on the company and the type of container it is. And what I've heard and read is that it often can go through 6 to 8 times before the quality is lessened.
Right,
And of course, you got to remember that food can. Oh, I was going to say, in food containers, go through really strict guidelines because it touches our food, and so it needs to be not only pure, but it needs to be have a certain amount of strength and resiliency.
All right, so I think that most other questions are about the legislative stuff. Before we get into that, it is 12:57, so I just want to give a super quick wrap up. This was only advertised until 1 o'clock. So if people have to jump off, thank you so much for joining us. I want to mention 2 quick links just before we end. One of them is if you enjoyed this webinar and you want to join us for more, we have all kinds of webinars happening throughout the month and then into the summer. You can find all of them at savethesound.org/stay-engaged. I'm gonna pop that into the chat in a few. I'll pop it in right now, actually. Let me do that. And then the last one is just as an environmental nonprofit, Save the Sound, we rely on generous supporters like you to make all of our work possible. So if you're able and you want to help us keep our waters clean, combat climate change, save endangered lands, and restore local ecosystems, please consider making a donation. You can do that at savethesound.org/donate. I am also going to throw that link into the chat, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bill if he has some time to get more into the legislative stuff. But thank you for joining us if you have to hop off.
So I'll just go through these. I don't think this is comprehensive, but these are the ones that I've been looking at. Can everybody see these?
Yep.
And they do have links to them. So when Karina sends this around, you can find them. If you're not familiar with navigating the CGA Connecticut, the legislative website. This top one, we just mentioned NIPS falling through the grid. This is SB 1037, and a form of the bottle bill has shown up for 4 years that I've been working at the legislature. It's an ongoing issue. It's very complicated between the handlers and spacing. A lot of it is some of those small urban liquor stores don't really have a place to take all this stuff back. So there's a lot of intricacies to this. We support this. We're not the leads on this bill, but if you want to follow and read public comment, you can click on this link. And what essentially we're trying to do is modernize the bottle bill. When it first started, it was 5 cents deposit, and it's still 5 cents deposit. And 5 cents doesn't mean 5 cents. And a lot of things don't have the deposit, like wine bottles and nips. So that's what is being attempted here. I'm not sure at what stage it is. Session's coming to a close. I think there's still a chance this may pass. Sherill, I don't know if you want to add to that. Okay. So, and then this next one is that group that has a number of different components, HB 6502, which includes the polystyrene, balloons, release of balloons. There's been some regional bans out on Long Island. There's definitely an appetite to people see. I'm sure you've all seen them if you've gone down to the beach or hanging in trees, especially those Mylar balloons. They last a long time before they break down. And then the single-use straws, that's there are some people that need straws to consume food because of their different physical challenges. So there's a really interesting way to maybe approach that. And we've sort of talked about the compostable bags. But Sherill, do you want to share what you were discussing with us yesterday about the option for straws and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it was on one of my slides and I knew I was running out of time, so I wanted to scan through it quickly. But there are a lot of municipalities, especially in California, Portland, Oregon area, and Washington, that are beginning to pass local ordinances to help with the idea of reducing waste. And an easy one that could be done right now related because of COVID and some of the challenges around COVID is as simple as requiring customers to opt in versus needing to opt out, and related to takeout food. And I'll give you an example. I go, I call up my favorite restaurant and I say, I want to order some, whatever. And when I get the bag back, it has plastic utensils, it's got napkins, it might have straws, and it might have lots of those individual little condiments of mustard or ketchup or whatever. Well, I'm bringing it home and I don't need all those things. And it's very challenging to help restaurants understand we don't want those things. And so the ordinances that these communities have had in California is to say restaurants can't provide these things unless we as customers ask for it. And so it's an opting in versus a requesting we don't want it. And that will help reduce the amount of, crap that we're getting in our homes that we're not going to use, all these single-use items that we don't need, as well as if you're eating, picnicking or whatever, and you don't need all that ketchup, then maybe those ketchup containers won't end up being litter. So I just wanted to make sure I shared that with you. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, that's great. And then if they would have straws for people who would need them, they could request them and they would be available, which might solve that problem. And then there's always the issue with markets, which Sherill touched on with SB 928. And so there's what's going on is they want to talk to manufacturers and different people in the industry about what recycled content could be, how could it drive markets, what would be recommended. A lot of times it's better not to put it in regulation and let the market drive that. It all depends on how well it's working. And then this last one, oh yes, SB 926. So there is a group called the PFAS Free Connecticut, and a lot of consumer items have PFAS in them. Now PFAS are an emerging contaminant. They're highly toxic. They do not break down. The health risks are becoming increasingly known. And a lot of the stuff like pizza boxes, many times if it has greasy food and it's a fiber, it'll have PFAS to keep it from soaking in. And what was really interesting that I just saw an article is that I don't know, 70 something or compostable or paper-based straws that are on the market now as an alternative to plastic straws. 90% of them contain PFAS. So yes, it's not a plastic straw, but it's a chemical soaked fiber compound, which is better. So what this is trying to do, there's a companion bill to ban firefighting foam. That's probably going to pass. This one was a step farther. Vermont just passed a similar legislation, I think 2 weeks ago, to just start cutting it off at the faucet. Try to find materials other than PFAS. There's over 5,000 different chemical species of PFAS. There's long chain, short chain. It shows up in lots of the parts of the food chain. There was just an article that came out with high levels of PFAS in fur seals and Australian sea lions, and especially in their young. It's getting concentrated in the milk that's fed to the young marine mammals and all the potential health effects of that. So really it's an attempt to just stop using it. It's going to be around for a long time. My school where my son goes, the cutoff limit is 70 parts per trillion PFAS. After that, you have to start drinking bottled water. We have a couple of wells in town. I'm from Killingworth that are near the fire station. Like Town Hall, they can't use their well anymore because the PFAS levels are too high. That groundwater is contaminated. At the school, it's below the 70. I think it was 38 or 26 or something. Am I going to want my kid to drink that water regardless of what the EPA limit is? No. So they're not letting kids use the water fountains. So the point of this is that, if we quit causing the problem, we don't have to spend a bunch of money later on, and we don't have to risk our health. And it's involved with the single-use stuff primarily, this bill. And I'm sure there's other ones. We track dozens of bills and we have priorities. So feel free to explore the website and see what other bills might fall into this category.
Thanks, Bill. Just a quick note for anybody not actively monitoring the chat. Sherill is throwing some wonderful links and resources in there, so make sure you're checking them out. But I think the biggest conversation around the legislative stuff right now seems to be around HB 6502 and the balloons. So there's a lot of concern that only addresses the releasing of balloons, whereas people feel it should be addressing balloons in general and banning balloons. I don't know if you want to talk about that or if you know of anything else going on related to that.
Well, my line of work is dealing with water quality and fisheries and wildlife. So for me, the primary concern is the release of the balloons out into the environment. Do we need balloons in our society is a bigger question. I personally, I think there's other way. A bouquet of flowers is a nice thing to celebrate with versus a balloon, and you can throw it in your compost pile and it's gone, and you can throw it on your flower bed the next year. So this is not dealing with that right now. That would be a pretty strong lift because there's factories that make balloons and employ people, and there would be potential fiscal impacts to that industry. But keeping them under control, not releasing them to the environment, is priority.
All right, I think that we're going to wrap up. I don't think there's any other large questions in the chat. I think that was a lovely webinar. We've gotten a lot of great feedback already. So thank you, Bill and Sherill, for being our presenters, and thank you everybody for joining us. As I said, I'll send around a follow-up email with a lot of the resources that we talked about that we put into the chat, along with a link to the recording. So thanks for joining us and have a good rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks, everybody.